In September 2024, Hungary and China signed a series of landmark agreements. At first glance, this might sound like just another set of trade deals. But the truth is, these agreements mark a turning point in Europe's geopolitical landscape. They show how one country, Hungary, is willing to step far outside the European mainstream and aligning closely with Beijing, even now that most of Europe is wary of China. To understand why this matters and where it could lead, we need to dive into history, politics, economics, and global strategy. Because what is happening between Budapest and Beijing is not just about railways, loans, or jobs. It is about the future of Europe itself. Let's start with a bit of background. Hungary joined the European Union in 2004, in the great wave of Central and Eastern European countries integrating into the West. At that time, Hungary was seen as a model pupil, eager, reform-oriented, and enthusiastic about being part of Europe. For a few years, Hungary followed Brussels closely. But when Viktor Orbán returned to power in 2010, the country took a sharp turn. Orbán presented himself as a defender of Hungarian sovereignty against what he called foreign meddling from Brussels. His rhetoric shifted away from Western liberalism and toward a concept he called the Eastern Opening. The message was clear. Hungary would not rely solely on Europe or the United States. It would also look to the East, to Russia, to Turkey, and especially to China. Why China? Because China offered something Brussels often did not. Money with fewer strings attached. No lectures about democracy. No conditions on rule of law. Just investment, loans, and promises of partnership. The Belt and Road Initiative, launched by Beijing in 2013, gave Orbán the perfect opportunity. This global infrastructure strategy seeks to connect China to Europe, Africa, and beyond through railways, ports, and digital networks. For Beijing, Central Europe is a key bridgehead into the EU market. And for Hungary, it is a chance to attract billions in investment and position itself as China's closest friend inside the Union. The most visible symbol of this partnership is the Budapest-Belgrade Railway. On paper, it is a game changer. A modern high-speed rail line linking Hungary's capital to Serbia, cutting travel time dramatically and creating a corridor from the port of Piraeus in Greece. Controlled by a Chinese company, all the way into Central Europe. For China, it means goods can flow from Asia into the EU faster. For Hungary, it means prestige, jobs, and a place on the Belt and Road map. But the reality is more complicated. The project is financed largely by Chinese loans. The contracts were awarded to Chinese firms, and much of the technology is imported from China. Critics say it is less about Hungarian development and more about Beijing exporting its overcapacities and locking Hungary into long-term dependence. Even Hungary's own state auditors have raised concerns about transparency and costs. Yet Orbán presses forward, framing it as proof that Hungary can attract major projects without Brussels' approval. Technology is another pillar of this relationship. While most of Europe has moved to restrict Huawei, citing cybersecurity risks and concerns about espionage, Hungary has done the opposite. It has welcomed Huawei with open arms. In 2024, Huawei announced a new research and development center in Budapest, making Hungary its main base in Central and Eastern Europe. This is not just about phones and 5G towers. It is about digital infrastructure, cloud services, and artificial intelligence. By hosting Huawei, Hungary is signaling that it is willing to diverge sharply from the EU's security guidelines. Finance tells a similar story. Chinese banks are expanding in Hungary. Budapest is positioning itself as a European hub for yuan-based transactions. For Beijing, this is a long-term play to internationalize its currency and challenge the dominance of the dollar and the euro. For Hungary, it is another way to advertise itself as China's gateway into Europe. Financial experts warn that this could lead to friction with the European Central Bank and complicate Hungary's role in the European financial system. Furthermore, there is soft power. Cultural cooperation is often overlooked, but it matters. Hungary now hosts one of the largest Confucius Institutes in Europe. Scholarships are being offered for Hungarian students to study in Chinese universities. Beijing's narratives are seeping into Hungarian media. These are small steps individually, but together they shape public opinion and cultivate long-term ties. The protests in Budapest against a planned Chinese university campus show that not all Hungarians are comfortable with this. Still, the government presses on. Now let's turn to the political motivations. For Orbán, China is not just about economics. It is about politics, both domestic and international. At home, he can tell voters, look, while Brussels threatens to cut EU funds over so-called rule of law issues, we are securing billions in investment from China. It reinforces his narrative of sovereignty and independence. Internationally, it gives him leverage. Every time the EU debates a tough stance on China, Hungary has the power to dilute or even block it. That makes Orbán valuable to Beijing. From China's perspective, Hungary is a perfect partner. The EU is one of China's largest trading partners, but relations have grown tense in recent years. Brussels now calls China a systemic rival, and the European Parliament has frozen some investment agreements over human rights issues. But if Beijing has a friend inside the EU, one willing to break ranks, it can weaken Europe's unity. Hungary could very well be that friend. Some analysts even call Hungary Beijing's Trojan horse inside the Union. So, how has the rest of Europe reacted? With growing alarm, European officials worry that Hungary is undermining EU solidarity. They point out that when Brussels pushes for a common approach on, for example, trade, technology, or human rights, Budapest often stands in the way. Some have floated the idea of suspending Hungary's voting rights in the Council. But such drastic steps are politically difficult. The EU works on consensus, and Orbán knows how to exploit that. The United States has been more blunt. Washington sees Huawei and Chinese investment as security threats. With Hungary deepening its ties, U.S. officials fear NATO's southeastern flank could be compromised. Intelligence sharing with Budapest has already been reduced. American diplomats warn that Hungary is drifting away from the Western alliance, even as it remains formally part of NATO. And what about Hungary's neighbors? The picture is mixed. Serbia welcomes the partnership. It too is heavily involved with Chinese investment and sees Hungary as an ally in building a new Eurasian corridor. But Poland, Czechia, and Slovakia, Hungary's partners in the Visegrad Group, are skeptical. They worry that Orbán's embrace of Beijing will divide Central Europe and weaken their collective influence in Brussels. Among Hungarians themselves, opinions are divided. Some see opportunity, new jobs, modern railways, global prestige. Others see danger, debt, dependency, and loss of sovereignty. The protests against the Chinese university campus show that there is real pushback, especially among younger and urban populations. Yet Orbán's government is firmly committed. So where does this all lead? Hungary is clearly committed to a world in which China is rising and the West is in decline. Orbán wants Hungary to be China's key partner in Europe, a bridge between East and West, but also a gatekeeper that benefits from both sides. The risks are real: financial dependency, strategic vulnerability, alienation from allies in Brussels and Washington. The rewards are uncertain, but Orbán seems convinced this is the path to Hungarian strength. The bigger question is what it means for Europe as a whole. Can the EU act as a united front if one of its members aligns so closely with Beijing? Will Brussels find ways to counterbalance Hungary's strategy? Or will other countries follow its lead, opening the door to more Chinese influence inside the Union? These are not abstract questions. They go to the heart of Europe's future. In an age of great power rivalry, can Europe stay united? Or will external powers exploit its divisions? Hungary and China may seem like an unlikely pair, but together they are testing the limits of European unity and shaping the debate about the continent's place in a changing world. Only time will tell whether Hungary's gamble pays off or whether it leaves the country more isolated than ever.